Here's the winning routine that took me to becoming a top percentile medical student at Imperial College London. So I got into such a good habit, I'd naturally wake up at 4 a.m, no alarm needed, nothing. After getting up naturally at 4 a.m, I'd immediately go for a run. It can't be just any run though, it has to be a full marathon. After the full marathon, I'd come home and jump into a cold shower. Now the cold shower has to have freezing temperature, and my barometer is when my shower head is forming icicles, and I'm ready to really shock my nervous system into being awake so I can really tackle the day. After the cold shower, I'm now at sort of 4:45 a.m. I'm going to jump into a 1-hour mindfulness meditation session. In this session, I'm simultaneously listening to the classical giants like Mozart, and then I'm also contemplating on the realities of the universe, whether that's string theory or quantum mechanics. And then I'm ready for a grind session where I'm studying for 4 hours a day, memorizing next week's lectures. Now, all of this is a complete lie. I don't wake up at 4 a.m. I never have naturally. I don't like marathons. I've never had an experience of running a marathon. I definitely don't like cold showers. So these are the common myths that people in the general public think is what it requires to be a top performing medical student or a doctor. In this video, I'm going to outline 5 actual productivity tips that are going to take you from being a normal student to being a top performer, earning the very best grades in your class. And this applies to whether you're a high school student, a university student, etc. My name is Dr. Salman Rahman. I'm a GMC licensed medical doctor. I've had over thousands of hours studying, going through textbooks, and I want to bring you these 5 productivity tips that completely changed my relationship with studying and the performances I was seeing in my exams. So here's productivity tip number 1. This productivity tip is less just about studying or a productivity tip in general. This is a general life philosophy. If you start adopting, you're going to be blown away by all of the incredible opportunities that open up. And that's the power of asking. I want you to get in the habit of asking for absolutely everything. We have all seen those videos where, people are opening their university acceptance letters, whether that's from Harvard, Imperial, Oxford, etc. And, everyone's family is going crazy in the background. And, just like you, I went into the resume of these individuals and I'm finding crazy things that are completely beyond the pale for a normal person to be able to do. So, they're writing scientific research for some of the top scientific journals when they're in high school. They're running triathlons. They're doing all of these things. I started tapping into the power of asking, and I'll give you 2 examples of opportunities that did open up for me. So number 1, I realized that in my high school, there was no head boy or president position. And I wanted to be a brand ambassador for my 6th form and, represent our school in opening days, in debates, in other things. So I simply asked that, faculty, why don't we have this head boy position? And they opened one up. We had an election and I did end up winning. So that's one example. And this was a key experience that I was able to talk about during my medical interview that really was a pivotal experience that ultimately allowed me to get into medicine. The second opportunity that people have no idea about is one time I was writing a specialized research paper in quantum mechanics and string theory and generally in the philosophy of science. This is a very niche topic that I was tapping into, and I wasn't sure what I had written. Did it have validity? Did it have accuracy and weight? So one of the things I did is I looked up all of the top professors, the top minds in the field that I was researching into. I went into the websites of Oxford, Cambridge, and found the head of faculties for these particular subjects that I was doing the research in. And I sent out kind of 50 emails. 3 people responded, and I was blown away. I had the top professors who'd actually looked through my essays and they were giving me specific feedback. They're so passionate about their subject. They were just very happy to have a curious individual reach out to them and want some critique. So I got this specific critique and I was able to publish this scientific research on a top journal. So this is a, key experience and one of the experiences that I had that gave me an insight into the power of asking. So tip number 1, get in the habit of asking. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You come home after school, you've promised yourself, today's going to be that day, I'm going to get that assignment done. You sit down for a little bit of a break, no more than 15 minutes. You start scrolling on TikTok. All of a sudden, it's nighttime and you've not accomplished anything for the day. So productivity tip number 2 is always follow an after-school routine. So back in my high school days, I was very, very strict on following an after-school routine. Now you're going to ask me, Dr. Salman, but I'm tired after school. Can I not take a break at all? Taking a break is absolutely fine, and later in this video I'm going to teach you how taking productive break is a really powerful study technique. More on that later. So it's absolutely fine to take a break, but you must have a timer. Set it for 15 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes, but make sure you do not surpass that limit, or you're going to be in that rabbit hole all over again, scrolling your life away on TikTok, not achieving your ultimate goals and ambitions. So here's what my after school routine looked like back when I was in the high school. So I'd come home, I'd set a timer for about 15-20 minutes, take a nice break, and then I'd give myself another 15 minutes to get my workstation ready. I would clear the desk, I would ensure everything's primed and ready. I've got my highlighters, I've got my notes, I've got my paper and pen. And what that meant is I'm primed psychologically and physically ready to study. Then I'd do 1 hour session of study, then take 10 minutes break, and another hour of kind of studying, and then take another 10-minute break. What's really key here, and what people really miss out on, is make sure you study every single subject every single day. That way there are no imbalances in your study and you're not leaning, towards one subject over another. This is especially important because you will naturally tend to overemphasize on a subject that you do like, and where actually your time and energy is best spent on your subjects that you're weaker in. So productivity tip number 2, always follow an after school routine. So here's productivity tip number 3. This is a really pro one, not a lot of people will necessarily be aware of. I want you to get into the habit of batching your subjects together. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're switching between mathematics and then you go to English literature, and then from English literature you switch to physics, and from physics you go to geography. Each time you're going from one very different subject to another very different subject, there is a cognitive switch your brain has to do, and that causes kind of mental fatigue. So instead of doing that, I want you to group all of your similar subjects together. Let's group, let's say, maths, physics and chemistry together, and they all require a similar part of the brain where it's about problem solving, it's about mathematical skills, it's about analysis. And then after completing this batch, you move on to, let's say, doing English literature, language and history together, where it's about essay writing and argumentation. Because you've now grouped similar subjects into batches, there is less of a cognitive switch and less mental fatigue that's going to be incurred. So study tip number 3 is batch your work into similar subject categories together. Productivity tip number 4 is about tapping into the power of rest. I'm going to teach you a little bit about the way that the brain works. So there's a system in the brain that's called the default mode network. That's a series of different parts of the brain that are connected. What's interesting about the default mode network is that it is only activated during periods of rest. What this system actually does is it will organize your memories into neat folders. So there's been a bunch of studies done on how to utilize this. So they've done a study where they compared 2 cohorts. So the first cohort did some studying all in one go, and then they sat an assessment. The second cohort did a period of study, then they went for a break, and then they came and studied again, and then they did the assessment. And surprisingly, it was the second cohort that actually got a much higher grade on the assessment. That brings us to the point about why we're talking about the default mode network. We're going to use the power of active rest in order to utilize the default mode network. So resting is not only recommended, it's a mandatory part of ensuring that it's part of your study program. So there are 2 types of rest. There's bad rest, which is what we call passive rest, and then there's active rest. So passive rest, what does it look like? You've done a 1 hour study session, you've got a 10-minute 10-minute break. So you stay at your workstation and you're just tapping away on your phone. Now, why is this bad? Because your surroundings still remind you of work. You've not truly disconnected. Active rest involves, in your 10-minute break, you physically remove yourself from your workstation, you completely dissociate, and then you go away and do something that's completely different. You'll do something like table tennis, which is still using your brain, but in a restful, active way. There's top mathematicians who will do things like rock climbing in their breaks. And then when you come back, you're rejuvenated. And also in your rest, you've actually activated the default mode network. So all of what you've been studying is now being neatly organized into folders inside your mind so that you can actually recall what you have learnt, versus passive rest where it gets deleted very soon after studying it. So productivity tip number 4 is use the power of rest. Activate your default mode network. Productivity tip number 5 is to address your weaknesses head first. I'm going to give you an example to illustrate this point. Imagine you've just sat a maths exam and your teacher has handed your paper back to you. Out of 50 questions, you've got about 10 of them wrong. What's very tempting, and vast majority of people will end up doing this, is when looking through the 10 questions, pretend like you're going to get that right next time. Because when you're looking at something through hindsight, because hindsight is 20/20, you have this underlying assumption that you're going to get it right next time. However, what I want you to do is be genuine, sincere, and curious about what went wrong. I want you to ask yourself what it is about those fundamental concepts that you didn't get right. One thing I would do is whenever I got something wrong in an exam, I would promise myself next time I am not allowed to get that wrong for my next paper. One of the ways I address this is to find the pattern of things I was getting wrong, address those areas, have heavy focus on them, and then I'd actually teach that concept to someone who was new to it. And between all of these things, I completely consolidated my learning, and I found that when I was approaching the papers with more curiosity about what I got wrong, as opposed to just celebrating what I got right, my grades improved very, very rapidly. And when I was just assuming that I'll get this right sort of next time without addressing the gap, without confronting my weakness, I saw that my grades barely improved. Productivity number 5, confront your weaknesses head first.